I guess I should start by thanking my daughter for the extra hour of sermon prep this morning as she woke up a little bit earlier than normal. When looking back over the past few years, a few moments kind of stand out in my memory. One of my first few weekends in seminary, I was with a group of older students and somebody made a joke. Go figure. It was something along the lines of, last time I quoted Bart in a sermon, the congregation thought I meant Bart Simpson. I laughed along with the rest of the crowd, thinking that the joke teller was referencing Roland Barthes, the French literary and cultural theorist that I had spent the previous year reading and writing about in my undergraduate thesis. Fortunately for me, I laughed along with the group without chiming in, or else they all would have known that I didn't get their joke, at least not the way that I was supposed to. The joke referred, of course, to Karl Barth, the theologian. Turns out I was the wrong type of nerd to get that joke. Another instance at FSU, I remember one of the more seasoned students made another joke that I didn't get at all. Before class one day, we were exchanging pleasantries when he made a joke about one or another of Marx's theories with which I wasn't entirely familiar. And this theory was being applied, ironically, to a contemporary situation. I laughed, but I didn't quite get it. Now, I use the phrase, "I don't get it," fairly often. Sometimes I mean it to indicate that I got a joke, but only because I misunderstood it, as in the Bart situation in seminary. Or I mean it as in, I'm unfamiliar with what you were talking about, but context clues tell me that you are telling a joke, so I will laugh, so as not to display my ignorance, as in the Marx joke that I didn't get here at FSU. Another time, I stood in front of a congregation and read a story about Jesus casting demons out of a man into a herd of pigs which promptly ran into a lake and drowned. I wasn't telling or reading a joke, so laughter doesn't seem the appropriate response, but once again, I'm struck with this feeling of not really getting it. This time, though, it's not because I wrote a paper on the wrong thinker, or I haven't read enough of another thinker. I think it's because I'm reading this story with some questions or some presuppositions that might preclude me from immediately getting it. It's 2013. We're in an age marked by technology and research, diagnosis and prescription, with periodic flare-ups of debates on the connection between violence and mental health and where the government needs to fit in with these two categories. In the story from today, after the pigs run into the water, verse 35 states that people came out to see what had happened, and when they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. It almost seems like the people are more afraid of the reformed demoniac than the possessed man. Perhaps because the possessed man was heavily guarded and removed from society, but more on that in just a little bit. The claim that the man had returned to his right mind suggests that possession entails some kind of loss of mental control. The men's great strength and continued escapes into the wilds denotes a loss of physical control as well. Were such behaviors noticed today, a mental health professional may diagnose the Gerasene man with some kind of trance and possession disorder, if using the international classification of disease put out by the World Health Organization, or he might be diagnosed with some form of dissociative disorder, likely dissociative identity disorder, if using the most recent publication of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders put out by the American Psychiatric Association. Among the diagnostic criteria for dissociative identity disorder are disruption of identity, characterized by two or more distinct personality states, or an experience of possession, amnesia, and the disturbance is not a part, or not a normal part, of a broadly accepted cultural or religious practice, among other diagnostic criteria. Now, I should be very clear. While I've read some books, I am not a mental health professional. However, I am a professional student of what constitutes broadly accepted cultural or religious practices. It seems to me that in the case of exorcism, there could occur a conflict of diagnoses and diagnosticians, for that matter, from priests to MDs to PsyDs to PhDs. This is particularly evident in a recent handbook put out by the Catholic Church. In 1999, the Vatican issued a roughly 90-page instruction manual for performing exorcisms, entitled De Exorcismis et Supplicanibus Quibusdum, of exorcisms and certain supplications. This was the first update to the manual since 1614. Now, the manual is entirely in Latin, so I make no claims to have read it. However, UK's The Guardian reported that unlike its predecessor, De Exorcismis warns against confusing possession with mental illness. Among the signs of demonic possession are, quote, this is from the manual, speaking in unknown languages, discerning distant or hidden things, and displaying a physical strength that is at odds with the possessed person's age or state of health. But the guide warns that these signs can all denote sickness rather than evil. It adds that exorcism should only be tried, quote, after diligent inquiry and after having consulted experts in spiritual matters and, if felt appropriate, experts in medical and psychiatric science who have a sense of spiritual reality. Indeed, one of the trained exorcists in the United States, Father Gary Thomas, the Diocese of San Jose's official Vatican-trained exorcist. It's quite a title. He was asked last November by the Denver Catholic Register, how do you determine if someone is actually possessed? He responded, I don't make these decisions in a vacuum. I have a medical doctor, a clinical psychologist, and a psychiatrist whom I consult with. You have to rule out the natural before you assume the preternatural. The discernment can take 6 months to a year. It seems then that there are two types of discourses surrounding this phenomena in the contemporary world. One medical, scientific, quote unquote secular, one theological, metaphysical, or quote unquote religious. As we've seen with Father Thomas, though, there can be a significant amount of overlap when describing these experiences, and there can also be cooperation between those participating in the various discourses. One psychologist, Dr. Stephen Diamond, wrote a book positing that humans are driven by a daimonic, not demonic, force. It seems to be somewhat similar to the zeal of Elijah that we heard about in the first reading. For Diamond, the daimonic is the force driving human action from anger to rage to creativity. There are those who learn to ignore this force, who become stoic or apathetic or anhedonistic, as he puts it. Those who have more successfully integrated this force into what he calls the spheres of their being. And then there are also those whose lives come to be dominated by this force due to some interruption in the development of their personality. This type of personality dominance can be manifested in destructive or constructive ways, dysdaimonic personalities and eudaimonic personalities, respectively. An extreme form of destructive manifestation is typically labeled possession, while an extreme constructive expression of daimonic personality dominance might be labeled creative genius. Diamond states that the daimonic, when unflinchingly confronted, abreacted or relived, owned and integrated, constitutes the healthy, vital force by virtue of which whatever degree of catharsis or cure affected during treatment is ultimately achieved. This isn't a force to demonize, so to speak, but it's a vital part of the human condition that must be managed and put to constructive use. He writes that psychologists can use theological terminology to help patients make sense of their experiences and achieve this integration, but he emphasizes the human element in their experiences. He believes that exorcisms expel the demon by suppressing or ignoring this basic human capacity without attempting to fully integrate the possessed person's experiences into their present psyche, a job completed by successful psychotherapy. He further argues that labeling extreme instances of this force as demonic possession has a tendency to take away the human element. It relegates extreme behavior to the realm of the supernatural. It provides one non-human being who is at fault, so we aren't at fault, and removes instances of possession from the realm of the social, of people living together and influencing each other while being influenced themselves. It's this social element, I think, that brings us back to the man in Gerasene. We're told a little bit about the man in Luke. For a long time, he had worn no clothes. He did not live in a house, but in the tombs. Many times the unclean spirit seized him. He was kept under guard, bound with chains and shackles. Every now and then he would break the bonds and be driven by the demons into the wilds. While the story is quite descriptive, there remains a lot of ambiguity. It's tough to tell when a demon is supposed to be talking through the man or when the man and Jesus are talking. For instance, Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. They begged him not to order them to go back into the abyss. Now the last hymn, I believe, was Jesus, but the first couple makes it a little unclear as to whether the man answered or whether the demons took control and answered for him. I'm not really sure. It seems like he or they would be used consistently, but maybe the reader is supposed to be a little confused. It also doesn't specify how long he had been nude in the tombs, chained and shackled. But his first statement to Jesus, "I beg you, do not torment me," makes it seem as though he's known torment for quite a while. I think I'm starting to get it. I think that whether the activity of the demoniac is labeled a most extreme case of dissociative identity disorder or being entered by many demons depends on who's doing the labeling. As for me, it seems that being socially ostracized, shackled, chained, and guarded might all take a toll on someone's behavior, demeanor, and psyche. The fact that we're looking at an extreme example of these phenomena, though, might keep us from considering the less extreme, the everyday stigmas placed on people in which we are complicit. In the story, the people were afraid at the sight of the healed man. I said earlier that the man may have been less threatening when removed from society and under heavy guard. Out of sight, out of mind, right? But when those who have violated social mores are removed from society, shackled, and ignored, it's tough to tell what of their problems are attributable to the individual and what should be blamed on how their community treated them. When those with mental illness, even or perhaps especially when not extreme, are ostracized, belittled, or ignored, it becomes difficult to tell what problems are caused by an individual affliction and what guilt the community must bear. When we keep those we know who are battling their personal demons out of sight and out of mind, maybe we ought to stop trying to figure out what's going on in their mind and examine what's keeping them out of our lives. Amen.